Last week we reviewed a very elaborate Metroidvania called Blasphemous. As you might have noticed from the length of that review, there was a lot going on, both visually but also and especially mechanically, with multiple overlapping systems contributing to a highly complex, combat-oriented game. While it was very fun, it was definitely an intense experience. It felt lovely then to be able to step back and play something on the other end of the scale. A stripped-back Metroidvania that captures the essence of the genre in a simple, effective, and above all, highly enjoyable way. You're listening to the almighty Backlog. I'm Ellie, and today's review is on Haiku the Robot, available for macOS, PC, and Switch. This review is based on the PC version. Originally released in April of 2022, developed and published by Mr. Morris Games. It's a Metroidvania game, and How Long to Beat has an average playtime of about 9 hours. If I was inclined to be incredibly reductive about Haiku the Robot, I think I'd describe it as a love letter to Hollow Knight. There's a degree to which that's probably unavoidable, both in the sense that this game is clearly heavily inspired by Team Jerry's dark, grim, bug-themed classic, but also because Hollow Knight was simply immensely successful, and obviously other developers are going to look at what it did well for their own games. I think there is rather a lot of Hollow Knight visible in Haiku, though I'm reticent to hold that against it in any way. Instead, I see it as a celebration of what that game did well, and a fantastic example of learning the lessons taught by a successful game. A lot of that comes through in the setting. Haiku's story takes place in Arcadia, a broken and disused world of scrap metal and animated machines. Humanity is long gone, destroyed by some far-forgotten tragedy. Left in their wake, machines carried on running, but at some point things started to go wrong. As we wander about the various locales in Arcadia, the threat is clear. The vast majority of the machines we come across bear a distorted, terrifying face that has taken over their displays, with the biggest of them even emitting a sinister black tar from their eyes and mouth. So, we've got a dead world and some kind of infection or presence infesting what's left of the denizens. So far, so Hallownest, so Radiance. In the midst of all this arrives our protagonist, Haiku. They are an adorable little robot, short and spherical, with a bright white face lit by blushing cheeks. Armed with a dinky golden sword, off they trot into the scrapyards of Arcadia. The dark tunnels and vast halls they find themselves in are cold, hostile places, but in true Metroidvania fashion, there are lots of little details built into the sprites and backgrounds that tell the story of where you are. Shadows of spindly pylons are dotted around, the slack, dangling wires tracing maze-like lines between structures. Dank sewers echo with running water, featuring a different class of enemies to the rest of the world, seemingly separate evolutions of mechanical beings adapted for survival in the watery depths. My favourite area, a disused bunker, shows the last signs of humanity. Empty beds crowded together, a walk-in refrigerator sealed and unused, and the centre chamber split apart and exposed to the battering rain and howling winds. The sense of character that pervades Arcadia is, as you can probably guess, absolutely fantastic. I adore games that manage this kind of environmental storytelling, and it seems to me that in the modern day, the Metroidvania genre is at the forefront of it. That makes sense, in fairness. After all, exploration is a core tenet of the genre, and running around bland worlds is far less fun than platforming through one that has a story to tell baked into the bricks and mortar beneath your feet. Haiku's approach to it is, I think, emblematic of the game as a whole. What it lacks in bells and whistles, it makes up for in commitment, in understanding the needs of the genre and audience, and in simply doing a bloody good job of it. The enemies you fight are a great example of this as well. Every one of them is some sort of mostly electronic device in some form or another, recognisable to us but also twisted into some strange new form by Arcadia's virus. In the early stages you'll find light bulbs that flitter around, and batteries that hop back and forth, but later areas of the game speak to the lengths humanity went to in automating their lives. Tanks trundle around on their own in the outskirts of the bunker, nail guns flap about on makeshift steel wings firing down at you in a rumbling factory, and in the dark depths underground, automated drills carve repeating patterns, heedless of the decay above. They paint an image of a desolate remnant of society, each one mindlessly repeating their function, literal automata, despite the recipients and point of those functions being long gone. They serve as a brilliant illustration that this really isn't a journey to save Arcadia, but simply to silence it. With all this wonderful design work on display, It might come as a surprise then to learn that the actual mechanics underpinning the gameplay of Haiku are as simple as they come. Pretty much every encounter in the game is dealt with by swinging Haiku's sword in a wide arc in front of them, with little evolution in that. Perhaps for some that might not be a deep enough combat system to sink their teeth into, but as I said up top, I found Haiku's back to basics approach refreshing and charming. You can also leap up high above an enemy and strike down on their head, pogoing Haiku up for a return strike. Just as in games like Hollow Knight, getting the hang of this can turn a challenging fight into a brief affair. That's not to say there's no depth or complexity to Haiku at all, of course. Obviously, there are upgrades to find for Haiku's hardware, like more health, while special computer chips can be found which can be slotted into Haiku for passive bonuses. At the beginning of the game, Haiku has the capacity to equip just 3 chips, one green, one red, and one blue. Each of these categories corresponds to a specific function of chip. Green ones are exploration based, for example, while red ones augment Haiku's combat prowess. Progressing through the game unlocks more chip slots. This, in theory, allows for more variance in how one builds Haiku. I say in theory though because in practice I couldn't see a lot of use for some of them. Some chips do things like giving Haiku explosive or electric powers, but I found them to be a bit of a distraction in all honesty. Nothing really worked quite as well as increasing the length and critical hit rate of Haiku's sword and mullering enemies that way. There's an intriguing riff on a mana system in Haiku that warrants a bit of inspection. In essence, there are 2 kinds of primary consumable you'll have to manage in the game: scrap metal and Haiku's heat gauge. The former is easy enough. It's basically just the game's currency, dropped by enemies or found by destructible shrines left by some unknown precursor. Obviously, you're going to be spending it on stuff from the game's various stores, but it also serves another function. It's also your resource for healing. Early in the game, Haiku finds a wrench that unlocks the ability to heal. This is done slowly, placing Haiku in a vulnerable spot as they repair themselves, but to do so costs scrap metal. This means the beginning of the game is notably more challenging than the endgame. Well, for a given value of challenge, since part of this game's draw is that it's not terribly hard. But this is because your scrap reserves are so much smaller when enemies drop a couple of bolts at a time, and you have to choose between healing or powering through to try and afford an upgrade. The latter resource is your heat gauge. Haiku's just a little bot after all, so they can only do so much before they overheat. Most of your more useful actions raise Haiku's temperature, including healing and dodging. This sounds annoying, and it can be, but mainly it's there for gameplay balance, stopping you from spamming techniques too much. The temperature drops back down again on its own, and you can also find coolant upgrades to give yourself more mana, as it were, but the main way you'll drop your temperature is through beating enemies up, meaning that the game prioritises aggression in combat, which is a good thing, because it stops you turtling up. While it's very roughly analogous to things like Soul in, say it with me, Hollow Knight, I think this is actually one of Haiku's more unique mechanics, and I love the way it ties into the setting itself. I've really been enjoying diving into Metroidvanias over the last few months. It's not a genre that's new to me by any stretch, but as I find myself turning to Steam more and more for my games, I found myself truly immersed in the genre. It turns out lots of indie developers love making these games. One thing I've noticed though is the profusion of games that love to follow Hollow Knight's lead in producing Metroidvanias that are focused on high and consistent levels of challenge. Sometimes this is present in complex and unforgiving combat that uses Souls-light mechanics to punish player death, and sometimes this manifests as Path of Pain-esque platforming, pushing player dexterity and reactions to their limit. I think if you're just casually looking in, that often that's what you can see in the indie Metroidvania scene, but pleasingly there's also a thriving group of players and developers focused on a more casual experience. These games, of which Haiku is one, care about the exploration and the world building. While they're not against a decent bit of combat or tricky platforming, it's not the primary focus. The end result is a fabulously solid game. Haiku more or less hits everything I want from a Metroidvania personally. The simple platforming makes exploration a breeze. The map is big but not paralysingly so. The combat is simple to grasp, and the world and narrative of the game unfold before you as you explore and piece the story together. It's like a perfect distillation of the genre into one brief package. In fact, I'd go so far as to say I would genuinely recommend it as a starting point to anybody looking to get into Metroidvanias. I liked it enough to do something I rarely do, and go back in for the true final boss and post-game content, and even then it came to less than 10 hours of play according to my Steam library. There's a lot to be said in favour of that. it makes it far more accessible than recommending some 30+ hour marathon Metroidvania, and its low difficulty makes it a perfect introduction. Haiku the Robot might owe a lot to Hollow Knight, but in the end I think it stands tall on its own merit, a very fine entry into a crowded, competitive space. The final score is 6 out of 7, excellent. Games with a touch of brilliance. It might only just miss out on being an absolute favourite, but you should definitely play this. This has been Ellie on the Almighty Backlog. You can support this project by reading the review over on thealmightybacklog.wordpress.com, or by listening to the pod review hosted on RSS and YouTube. Please feel free to follow me over on Mastodon, Blue Sky and/or Backlogged by following the links on the blog. If you'd like to support the show financially, you can do so by donating via PayPal to thealmightybacklog@gmail.com or by hitting the donate button on the blog. Thanks for listening, and have a lovely day.